I, 42F, have finally decided to move out of my parents' house and break free from their control after 4 decades of emotional abuse and financial manipulation. This is a long and complicated story that spans over 40 years of systematic control and manipulation, but I need to share it, both to help process my own feelings and maybe help others trapped in similar situations. I never thought I'd be writing this post, but recent events have pushed me to finally take this step. I know what you're thinking: why would anyone still be living with their parents at my age? The answer goes back to the very beginning, and it's a pattern of control that started before I was even born. I wasn't a planned or wanted child. My parents were college sweethearts with big dreams of traveling the world and building their careers. Then I happened. My mom got pregnant during their junior year, and their first reaction wasn't joy, it was panic. They actually wanted to terminate the pregnancy, but both sets of my grandparents intervened and insisted they keep me. My mom had to drop out of college, move back in with her parents, and watch her dreams crumble before her eyes. She's never forgiven me for that, and she's made sure I knew it every single day of my life. For the first few years, I didn't even understand that she was my mother. I genuinely thought she was my sister since my grandmother was the one who actually raised me. This wasn't just a child's confusion, it was a deliberate arrangement. Mom would avoid spending time with me whenever possible, and when she did interact with me, it was mostly criticism or cold silence. She wouldn't even acknowledge me as her daughter in public, introducing me as her little sister well into my teenage years. My dad wasn't much better. He buried himself in work and treated me like an unwanted piece of furniture he had to navigate around. He would come home late, eat dinner in his study, and barely acknowledge my existence. The rare times he did interact with me were awkward and forced, usually prompted by my grandmother's insistence that he spend time with his daughter. These moments were so uncomfortable that I eventually stopped trying to connect with him altogether. My maternal grandmother became my real parent in every way that mattered. She was the one who taught me to read, celebrated my achievements, and made me feel loved. She would sit with me for hours, teaching me everything from basic life skills to complex subjects my parents should have helped me with. Even now at 92, she remains my biggest supporter and safe haven. The contrast between her loving care and my parents' coldness shaped my entire childhood and deeply affected my self-worth. The emotional abuse started subtly but grew more overt as I got older. My mother's resentment evolved from passive neglect to active criticism of everything I did. Nothing was ever good enough: my grades, my appearance, my interests, my career choices, even the way I breathed or walked. She would often tell me things like, "If we had been in high school together, I would have bullied you," or, "You should be grateful we even let you stay here." She would pick apart my appearance in public, making comments about my weight, my clothes, my hair, anything she could use to diminish me. There was a particularly cruel game she would play during family gatherings. She would start by praising one of my cousins or a friend's child, then turn to me with this cold smile and say something like, "See? That's what a daughter should be like. If only we had been blessed with someone like her instead." My father would just stand by silently during these moments, occasionally muttering, "Not now," if I tried to defend myself or leave the room. The controlling behavior intensified as I entered adulthood. They actively discouraged any attempts at independence, systematically sabotaging job opportunities that might have let me move out. When I was offered a position at a company across town in my late 20s, they convinced me it was a scam and that I would end up trafficked. When I got an opportunity to work from home as a virtual assistant, they insisted it was too risky and that I needed their protection from internet predators. When I did manage to get a local job in my 30s, they demanded most of my paycheck as a rent and repayment for raising me. This wasn't a reasonable request for contribution to household expenses. They would take 80% of my earnings, leaving me with barely enough to buy basic necessities. If I protested, they would threaten to kick me out with nothing, knowing I had no savings and nowhere to go. They controlled every aspect of my finances, insisting on having access to my bank accounts for my own protection. My mother's manipulation was particularly effective because she would switch between cruel criticism and moments of apparent concern, keeping me constantly off balance. She would spend days tearing apart my self-esteem, then suddenly switch to being protective and caring. "We're just looking out for you," she would say after a particularly brutal verbal assault. "The world is dangerous, and you're not equipped to handle it alone." After decades of this treatment, I started believing her. I internalized the idea that I was incapable of surviving on my own. Even attempts to socialize or build relationships were strictly controlled. They would interrogate me about any friends I made, conduct background checks on them without my knowledge, and create obstacles to prevent me from meeting people. Dating was completely forbidden. You'll just get taken advantage of, my mother would say. Besides, who would want someone like you? When I did manage to make friends, they would find ways to sabotage these relationships either by spreading rumors about me or by making it impossible for me to maintain regular contact. My father's role in all this was more subtle but equally damaging. While my mother was the active abuser, he was the enabler who would justify and rationalize her behavior. He would come to me after particularly bad episodes and explain why mother was right to treat me this way, how it was all for my own good, and how I needed to try harder to meet their standards. He would use his position as a respected professional to lend credibility to their control, telling me that his experience in the world proved they were right about everything. The few times I tried to stand up for myself or suggest moving out, they would unleash a calculated campaign of guilt and threats. They would remind me of all they had sacrificed to raise me, tell me I was being ungrateful, and warn me that I would fail miserably on my own. My father would chime in with detailed scenarios of how I would end up homeless and destitute without their guidance. They would even bring up news stories about women my age who had failed in their attempts at independence, using these as a proof that I couldn't make it on my own. But recently, something changed. I discovered a talent for creating handmade knitwear and started selling my pieces online. This wasn't just a hobby, it became my secret pathway to potential independence. I learned everything I could about knitting, watching tutorials late at night when my parents were asleep, practicing different patterns, and gradually developing my own unique style. To my surprise and delight, people actually loved my work, and I began earning a steady income. For the first time in my life, I felt a glimmer of real independence. I kept this business secret at first, working on my projects late at night when my parents were asleep. My grandmother, the only one I trusted, helped me set up an online store and even let me use her address for shipping supplies. Each sale was a small victory, a step towards something I barely dared to dream about, freedom. Unfortunately, my growing success eventually caught their attention. My mother discovered my online shop while snooping through my browser history, something she still does regularly despite me being in my 40s. Her reaction was immediate and predictable. She claimed that my earnings should go to the family fund since I was living under their roof. "After all we've done for you," she said, her voice dripping with familiar manipulation, "this is the least you can do to repay us." My father backed her up, as always, insisting that I owed them 4 decades of care. They've started monitoring my bank accounts even more closely, demanding detailed explanations of every penny I spend, and trying to take control of my online shop's accounts. They even contacted some of my customers directly, claiming they were helping manage my business. When I confronted them about this invasion of privacy, they turned it back on me, accusing me of being sneaky and ungrateful. The situation reached a breaking point last week when I discovered they had been emailing my customers, offering special deals, without my knowledge and pocketing the money. They had somehow gained access to my business email and were essentially trying to hijack my entire operation. When I confronted them, my mother's response chilled me to the bone: "Everything you have belongs to us. You're nothing without us." This incident triggered memories of every time they had sabotaged my attempts at independence. The job offers they had convinced me to turn down. The friendships they had destroyed. The relationships they had prevented. The savings they had taken. Looking at my mother's smug face as she claimed ownership of my business, something finally snapped inside me. I spent that night at my grandmother's house, crying and talking until dawn. She held me like she used to when I was small and said something that changed everything: "You're not trapped anymore. You have choices now." She was right. My business was generating enough income to support me. I had skills, customers, and a reputation I had built myself. For the first time in my life, I had options. Over the past week, I've been secretly preparing for my departure. My grandmother is helping me set up a new bank account at a different bank. I've been slowly moving my inventory to a small storage unit I rented. I've updated all my business accounts with new passwords and recovery information. I've even found a small apartment that I can afford with my current income. The hardest part has been maintaining a facade of normality while making these preparations. My mother seems to sense something is different. She's been more controlling than ever, questioning my every move and trying to reassert her dominance. Yesterday, she accidentally deleted several of my design files from my computer. Thankfully, I had backups. My father has started giving me lectures about family loyalty and gratitude. But for the first time in my life, their manipulation isn't working. I can see through their tactics now. Every guilt trip, every threat, every attempt at control just strengthens my resolve to leave. I know it won't be easy. At 42, I'm starting a life that most people begin in their 20s. I have a lot to learn about living independently, managing my own household, and navigating the world without their toxic protection. I plan to move out next week when they're at a family event. My grandmother and a few trusted friends will help me move my essential belongings and business supplies to my new apartment. I've already arranged for my mail to be forwarded and set up a new phone line. I know my parents will be furious when they discover I've left, but I'm finally ready to face their anger. I'm terrified but also excited. For the first time in my life, I'm taking control of my own destiny. My hands shake every time I think about what I'm about to do, but I know it's the right decision. I've spent 42 years living in fear and submission. It's time to start living for myself. For anyone else trapped in a similar situation, whether you're 22 or 42 or 62, it's never too late to break free. Please know that you deserve better. You deserve to live your own life, make your own choices, and pursue your own dreams. I'll update this post once I'm safely moved out. Update 1: It's been 3 months since my last post, and I wanted to share what's happened since then. I wish I could say everything went smoothly with my move, but life had other plans, including a medical emergency that almost cost me my life. Shortly after my previous post, while I was still finalizing my moving plans, I had a severe allergic reaction. I've been allergic to shellfish my entire life, something my parents have always known but consistently dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. My mother decided to prove I was faking by secretly adding shrimp to my food. Within minutes of eating, my throat started closing up. Instead of calling an ambulance immediately, my mother insisted I was being dramatic and told me to stop making a scene. My father just sat there, reading his newspaper as if nothing was happening. It was my grandmother who finally called 911 when she stopped by and found me struggling to breathe. The hospital stay was eye-opening in many ways. The doctors were horrified when they learned about the deliberate exposure to a known allergen. They insisted on documenting everything and even suggested I file a police report. What really struck me was my parents' behavior at the hospital. At first, they played the role of concerned parents perfectly. My mother cried in front of the medical staff, claiming she forgot about my allergy. But when the doctors and nurses weren't around, their true colors showed. My mother hissed at me that I was ungrateful for making them look bad, while my father demanded I sign a statement saying the incident was a misunderstanding. The real turning point came when a hospital social worker started asking questions about my home situation. My parents immediately tried to prevent me from speaking privately with her, claiming I was mentally unstable and couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions. This backfired spectacularly. Their controlling behavior only made the social worker more concerned. During my recovery, I had time to think and plan. The social worker put me in touch with resources for domestic abuse survivors. Yes, what I've experienced is considered abuse, even at my age. She helped me understand that my situation wasn't normal and that I deserved better. My online business actually grew during this time. Unable to sleep much in the hospital, I spent hours designing new patterns on my tablet. My customers were incredibly supportive when I explained the shipping delays, and many even placed advance orders to help me stay financially stable. The most unexpected development came from my father's parents. After hearing about the hospital incident, they reached out for the first time in years. They were horrified by what had been happening and offered to help me get established on my own. My grandfather, a retired lawyer, has been helping me understand my legal rights and ensuring my business is properly protected. My grandmother, the one who's always supported me, has been amazing through all of this. She visited me every day in the hospital and helped me finalize the arrangements for my new apartment. She even hired a moving company to pack and move my things while my parents were distracted with damage control at the hospital. I'm now settled in my own place, and my business is doing better than ever. The peace of living alone is indescribable. Simple things like deciding what to eat for dinner or when to go to bed, decisions most adults take for granted, feel like precious freedoms. My parents have been alternating between angry accusations and tearful pleas for me to return. They've tried everything from threats to guilt trips to financial manipulation. Last week, they even showed up at my new apartment with a police officer, claiming I was having a mental breakdown and needed to be rescued. Thankfully, I had documentation from the hospital social worker and was able to prove I was perfectly competent and safe. I've blocked their numbers and email addresses, but they keep finding new ways to contact me. Their latest tactic is sending relatives and family friends to check on me and try to convince me to reconcile. Each person comes with the same script about family loyalty and forgiveness, but I'm standing firm. For the first time in my life, I'm truly free. Yes, I'm starting my independent life decades later than most people, but better late than never. My business is growing, I'm making real friends without my parents' interference, and I'm even considering dating, something that was strictly forbidden under their roof. To everyone who commented on my last post with support and advice, thank you. You helped me find the strength to follow through with my plans, even when things got complicated. And to anyone else in a similar situation, it's never too late to break free. The world isn't as scary as abusive parents make it out to be. Update 2. It's been another 2 months since my last update, and a lot has happened. My knitwear business has really taken off, I've been featured in several online craft magazines, and my customer base has grown significantly. However, this success has brought new challenges with my parents. When they discovered how well my business was doing, they've been stalking my online store. They filed a legal claim stating that they deserve a portion of my earnings as compensation for their years of support. They're arguing that since they provided housing and business training, they never did, they're entitled to be considered silent partners. Thankfully, my grandfather, Dad's father, immediately stepped in to help. Being a retired lawyer, he not only dismissed their claim as ridiculous but also helped me document their history of financial abuse. He's been incredible, working with me to properly structure my business and protect my assets. His support has been eye-opening. I never knew what having a real father figure could feel like. My father's parents have also shared some shocking family history with me. Apparently, my mother's controlling behavior was a concern even before I was born, but everyone was too afraid to intervene. They expressed deep regret for not stepping in sooner, especially after seeing how the abuse escalated over the years. The business side of things has been both exciting and challenging. I've hired my first employee, a part-time assistant who helps with shipping and customer service. It's strange being in charge, making decisions without having to ask permission or justify every choice. I'm learning to trust my instincts, something my parents always told me I couldn't do. My parents' attempts to interfere haven't stopped, but they've gotten more desperate. They tried to report my business to the IRS for tax evasion, everything was perfectly legal, contacted my suppliers to cancel my orders, failed, and even attempted to hack my business email. Thankfully, I had strong security measures in place. Their latest scheme was particularly devious. They created a fake social media account pretending to be a dissatisfied customer and started spreading lies about my products being dangerous and poorly made. When that didn't work, they escalated to claiming I was stealing designs from other artists. My loyal customers quickly came to my defense, sharing photos of their purchases and calling out the fake reviews. The most significant change has been in my personal growth. I've started seeing a therapist who specializes in adult children of abusive parents. She's helping me understand that the shame and self-doubt I carry aren't mine to bear. I'm learning to recognize manipulation tactics and set healthy boundaries. My grandmother, maternal, continues to be my rock. Despite her age, she's been actively helping me build my new life. She's even teaching me her old knitting techniques, which I've incorporated into my designs. My customers love these vintage-inspired pieces, not knowing they're actually patterns passed down through generations. Living alone is still an adjustment, but I'm getting better at it every day. I've made friends with other business owners in my area, joined a book club, something my mother always forbade, and even started taking weekend cooking classes. The freedom to make these simple choices still feels surreal sometimes. I had dinner with my father's parents last week, the first real family dinner I've experienced without manipulation or criticism. We talked about my business plans, and they actually listened and offered constructive advice. My grandmother, paternal, even ordered a custom sweater from my website, insisting on paying full price to support my business. The contrast between my old life and new one becomes clearer every day. Yes, I still have moments of doubt and fear. Sometimes I wake up panicking, thinking I'm back in their house. But these moments are getting rarer, and I'm getting better at handling them. My business mentor, arranged through a local small business association, says I'm on track to double my income by year's end. I'm reinvesting most of my profits into the business, building a proper website, and planning to rent a small studio space. These are decisions I can make freely now, without having to justify or defend them to anyone. For those following my journey, independence at 42 isn't easy, but it's absolutely worth it. Every day I discover something new about myself that was suppressed under my parents' control. I'm learning that I'm actually good at making decisions, managing money, and running a business, all things they told me I could never do. I'll update again when there are significant developments. For now, I'm focused on growing my business and healing from decades of abuse. Thank you all for your continued support and encouragement. Update 3, it's been 6 months since my last update, and I can finally say I've achieved true independence. This will be my final update, as I've reached a point where my story is less about escaping abuse and more about building my new life. The biggest news is that my business has expanded beyond my wildest dreams. What started as a small online knitting shop has grown into a full-fledged artisanal knitwear brand. I've moved into a proper studio space, hired 3 part-time employees, and even started offering knitting workshops. The irony isn't lost on me, the hobby my parents dismissed as wasteful is now providing me with financial security they claimed I could never achieve on my own. My father's parents have become instrumental in my business growth. My grandfather helped me incorporate the business properly and protected my intellectual property rights. More importantly, they've shown me what healthy family relationships actually look like. We have weekly dinners where we discuss business strategies and life in general, without any manipulation or hidden agendas. The final confrontation with my parents came when they attempted to force their way into my studio during a workshop. They caused a scene, screaming about ungrateful daughters and family obligations. Instead of feeling terrified or ashamed, I calmly called the police and had them removed. My students, mostly women around my age, were incredibly supportive, and several shared their own stories of breaking free from toxic family dynamics. Following that incident, I received a lengthy email from my mother. It was the same mix of guilt-tripping and threats I'd heard my entire life, but this time, something was different. I felt nothing. No guilt, no fear, no obligation. I realized I had finally broken free from their emotional control. I didn't even bother responding. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer and blocked their new email addresses. My maternal grandmother, now 93, continues to be my biggest cheerleader. She's moved into an assisted living facility near my studio, and I visit her daily. She helps me test new patterns and tells me stories about her own mother's knitting techniques. These moments are precious, especially as I realize how different my relationship with my own mother could have been. The most unexpected development has been the community I've built. My workshops have become more than just knitting classes, they're support groups for women finding their independence at different stages of life. Many of my students are like me, learning to trust themselves after years of being told they couldn't. Watching them grow in confidence as they master new skills is incredibly rewarding. I've also started dating someone, a kind, respectful man who owns a local bookstore. He understands my background and respects my boundaries. It's my first healthy romantic relationship at 42, and while that sometimes feels strange, I'm learning that it's never too late for any of life's experiences. My business mentor recently told me something profound: success isn't just about making money, it's about building the life you want. I'm finally doing exactly that. I have my own apartment decorated the way I like, a thriving business I built myself, genuine friendships, and most importantly, peace. To my parents, if you somehow read this, I'm not coming back. The control you had over me is gone. I'm not the helpless, incapable person you tried to convince me I was. Your last attempt to contact me through relatives made one thing clear: you're not sorry for what you did, you're just sorry you lost control. To anyone else who might be in a similar situation, I know how impossible it seems to break free, especially later in life. Society often makes us feel like we've missed our chance if we haven't achieved independence by our 20s. That's not true. I started over at 42, and while it wasn't easy, it was absolutely worth it. My life isn't perfect. I'm still learning things most people figured out decades ago, still healing from years of abuse, still discovering who I am without my parents' constant criticism. But for the first time in my life, I'm genuinely happy. I'm free to make my own decisions, pursue my own dreams, and live life on my own terms. Thank you to everyone who has followed my journey and offered support and advice along the way. Your encouragement helped me stay strong during the darkest moments. This will be my last update, not because the story is over, but because I'm ready to focus entirely on writing the next chapters of my life. To end with some good news, I'm in the process of writing a book about knitting patterns, incorporating the techniques passed down from my grandmother. Each pattern will tell a story of healing and growth. It feels like the perfect way to transform decades of pain into something beautiful and useful. Life begins when you choose to live it on your own terms, regardless of your age. I'm living proof of that.